And you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy says Moscow is not seeking peace but readying new attacks days before a meeting between the Russian and US leaders. He warns Russian troop movements signal fresh offensive operations. The United States and China extend their tariff truce for 3 months, avoiding triple-digit duties on each other's goods. President Donald Trump says higher tariffs are suspended until November the 10th under his new executive order. Israeli planes and tanks bombard eastern Gaza City overnight, killing at least 11 people, witnesses and medics say. Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayya is heading to Cairo for talks on reviving a US-backed 60-day truce and hostage release deal. A 4-year-old boy dies of heat stroke in Italy as extreme temperatures put cities across France, Italy and the Balkans on red alert. Wildfires forced thousands to evacuate and threaten tourist sites in Turkey and Spain amid persistent heat dome over Europe. US consumer inflation remains at 2.7% year-on-year in July, but underlying price pressures increase as President Donald Trump's tariff impacts the economy. The data comes amid growing concerns over its reliability and central bank assessments. President Trump also says that he will send 800 National Guard troops to Washington and temporarily take control of the city's police department, bypassing local leaders. The move marks an unusual use of presidential power in the US Capitol. A Thai soldier suffers a severe ankle injury after stepping on a landmine while patrolling near the Cambodian border. The incident comes days after the neighbors agreed to a ceasefire following last month's deadly clashes. Torrential rains on São Vicente Island in Cape Verde kill 8 people, including 1 by electrocution, and leave 3 others missing. Floodwaters swamp roads, sweep away vehicles, and overwhelm emergency services. Now we start this hour with our top story. President Donald Trump is open to holding a trilateral summit in Alaska with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy, according to a White House official. This comes as the White House is currently planning a bilateral meeting with Putin at his request, according to reports. Meanwhile, Trump plans to meet Putin in Alaska, saying the parties, including Zelensky, were close to a deal that could resolve the 3.5-year-old conflict. We're now joined by Gilbert Doctorow. He's a Russian affairs expert and he joins us live from Brussels. Gilbert, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. I want to get your thoughts on this situation as we count down to August the 15th. Is Alaska a neutral ground or a strategic message to Moscow, given its direct maritime border with Russia? It's obviously the first meeting between US and Russian officials since 1988, rather. What are your thoughts on that?
Alaska has a lot of symbolism. The date of the meeting has a lot of symbolism. A few of my colleagues have noticed this. Not the 15th of August happens to be the Ferragosto, the celebration of the Emperor Augustus. Augustus was known as the man who introduced peace for many decades. He introduced what we call the Pax Romana. And I think that Mr. Trump's assistants were well aware of the significance of the 15th of August. Alaska was purchased by the United States. It wasn't conquered, it was purchased. At the same time, as Russian television has been showing us the last two days, there are descendants of the original Russian settlers there. There are congregations of the Russian Orthodox Church in Alaska. Most of the congregants are Inuits, people we call Eskimos, but The point is that Russian culture did not die out in Alaska. And I think all of this has significance for what is about to happen in Ukraine. I cannot imagine that my colleagues are not aware of the $350 billion in Russian frozen assets, which will somehow have to be settled after the war is over. Now, wouldn't it make sense if some of, or all of that were applied to reconstruction in both the Russian-held and the Ukrainian-held parts? No one is talking about this, but if you have a moment, we can. The point is, apart from the extravagant solution that I just mentioned, a more modest solution is also to be anticipated at the Alaska meeting, but it will not be definitive. The Russians have said clearly they expect a follow-on meeting in Moscow afterwards. And a follow-on meeting would be to finish up the work, probably with the Ukrainians and the European present.
Gilbert, a lot of people are criticizing this meeting of Ukrainian allies mainly, and saying that this meeting is pointless without a Ukrainian presence at the table. What are your thoughts on that criticism, that this is merely for a photo op, and also risks not truly providing a lasting peace to the war without Ukraine at the table?
Those who are saying that are exactly the ones who do not want a peace. They would like the war to continue indefinitely so that they can justify military buildup in Europe and take money away from social benefits for the population and apply them to military industry. The ones who are saying that this is not going to succeed are precisely the ones who are not friends of Ukraine. They want to fight to the last Ukrainian. They are the ones who are multiplying the deaths of the Ukrainian young people. If a fair solution understood as fair by the broad population of Ukraine is put forward, then Mr. Zelenskyy's regime will be overthrown in a matter of days. And that is why nobody is talking about distributing the $350 billion in Russian frozen assets to the Ukrainian people, if they agree to a peace on Russia's terms. They will agree. All the widows who have not received a cent from the cheating, stealing government of Mr. Zelensky will get paid off, $100,000 each, why not? I'm trying to say that everything is being turned on its head by the propagandists in Berlin, in London, and in Paris. The reality is very different and much more optimistic. So your audience should feel comfortable. There will be no World War III. There will be a settlement to this. And Mr. Trump is genuinely a peacemaker.
Yes, Gilbert, do stay with us as we discuss further developments. We have an update coming in from Poland, where the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, while speaking at a cabinet meeting ahead of the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska, he weighed in on the situation.
No, nie ulega wątpliwości, że w interesie Polski jest, aby Rosjanie wyszła zwycięsko z tej konfrontacji i żeby cały czas, i mam nadzieję, że skutecznie, przekonywać prezydenta Trumpa do tego europejskiego stanu. To znaczy Ukraina nie może tej wojny przegrać i nikt nie ma prawa wywierać presji na Ukrainę, jeśli chodzi o ustępstwa terytorialne czy inne decyzje, które pachniałyby kapitulacją. I mówię o tym nie tylko dlatego, że tego wymaga solidarność z napadniętym narodem, sąsiedzkim, przyjaznym narodem, ale to przede wszystkim jest wymóg naszego bezpieczeństwa. Osłabiona Ukraina, niesprawiedliwie potraktowana, silna Rosja, zwycięska Rosja, to jest bezpośrednie i szybkie zagrożenie.
Moreover, as the tensions carry on and Trump and Putin's meeting looms, Ukrainian servicemen have voiced their views, saying it is wrong to discuss the country's future without their involvement. Let's take a listen.
Вони хочуть нашого президента поки що оставити збоку, самі зустрітися, це все з Понтом переговорити, домовитись, як їм обом буде краще. Перш за все, Америці, Росії, і так понятно, що вона хоче захопити наші землі. І вони там щось між собою домовляться, потім поставлять перед фактом.
Це, скажімо так, не дуже гарно з їхнього боку, тому що це саме питання України, це питання нашого майбутнього.
We're now joined by Gilbert Doctorow once again to discuss these further updates. Gilbert, territorial concessions are at the top of the agenda here. Donald Trump says he will try and get back territory for Ukraine in these talks with Putin. Russia, of course, now controlling 20% around approximately of Ukrainian territory. Do you think Donald Trump might be able to convince Putin to do that?
Oh, it's clear that he can and will, but the amount of territory that will be so-called exchanged is nominal. It is symbolic, but has no real weight in negotiations. As I said, there are ways that this can be solved which are more serious than exchanging a little fringe of territory around the city of Sumy next to the Russian border, or around Kharkov for the, say, 40% of Donetsk Oblast province that still is in Ukrainian hands, though it is officially by Russia considered to be its own territory. So the exchange idea is a kind of fig leaf for a much bigger negotiation. I believe that this settlement of Ukraine is within reach. It probably can be done completely within a month, but it will not be done on the basis that the broad population in the West has been led to believe. It will be done in a much more sophisticated way. People really underestimate the negotiating skills of Mr. Trump's team. They managed to turn around in this past weekend the thinking of the bête noire, of the most obstinate and difficult member of the United States Senate, the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, who from one day to the next, after playing golf with Mr. Trump, decided that this negotiation is really quite good and peace will arrive. This is the man who a few weeks before was calling for killing every Russian you can find. So in the statement made by the so-called coalition of the willing this past weekend, a new sentence was added to their statements, which contradicts completely what Europe was saying earlier. That is to say, we cannot speak about territorial losses for Ukraine. They have to keep what they had in 1992. Well, in their newest statement, they say that the war should stop and negotiations should start on the basis of the line of confrontation, meaning all the territories that Russia now has, it will keep. This is not necessarily de jure, but de facto. Everything is in motion. Mr. Trump's team has been working. Mr. J.D. Vance was speaking to those very people. He wasn't just listening to them in London this past weekend. He was speaking to them, and they added this sentence, which changes the whole nature of the European approach. Therefore, I would urge your audience to be optimistic. A solution will be found. I heard one sentence of your audience had the benefit, obviously, of English subtitles to what Mr. Tusk was saying. My Polish was strong enough for me to understand that he was against the Russian violation of property.
Yes.
And yes, and Mr. Tusk is not to be taken with any seriousness. The man has no political weight, and he has been anti-Russian from the moment he was born. So I don't listen to Mr. Tusk. Besides, he has a military that could be just devastated by Russia in one day. This is not a serious man. For that matter, the leaders in Europe have admitted in the last few days that they cannot participate in the negotiations because they have no military. That's correct, they don't. So let's get serious. The remarks made by these leaders is the losing side.
Gilbert, we'll move on to what's going on the ground next in our discussion. We move on now. Fierce clashes have erupted as Russian and Ukrainian forces vie for the control of the Donetsk city of Krasnoyarsk, also known as the Pavlovsk. According to reports, Russia's defense ministry announced that its battle group center struck Ukrainian positions in key Donetsk locations. At the same time, Ukraine's general staff reported Russian forces launched 35 attacks in the Pokrovsk region. deploying assault units to breach frontline defenses. Ukraine reportedly responded with reinforcements and strategies to locate and dismantle Russian assault units. We're now joined by Gilbert Doctorow once again to discuss this further. Gilbert, what is your opinion and analysis of what is going on the ground? Obviously, we heard today that Ukraine has made some very, very minor territorial gains back, particularly in the Sumy region, in the past few days. You've also got an escalating Russian military offensive, mainly from the air. What are your thoughts about what is going on amid the escalating hostilities, especially with the backdrop of the developing diplomatic movements as well?
Well, you had mentioned earlier in this program that the Russians hold 20% of what was Ukraine. Well, they've held 20% for most of the last 3 years. There hasn't been a great ground movement. And even today, there is not a big movement on the ground because the Russians are fighting a different war. They're destroying the Ukrainian army. They've killed 1 million men or taken them out of action because they're so severely wounded. That has been the Russian war. Now, you don't see that on the territory, but let's speak about territory since you've raised the subject. What the Russians are doing to this logistics hub, it was a hub, it's no longer a hub because it's surrounded. You can't be a logistics hub if you're surrounded on 3 sides. The purpose of this city, which is called in Russian Krasnoarmeysk and which is called Pokrovsk in Ukrainian, it's the same city, has been to receive and distribute arms and munitions coming in from the west and send them to the front lines. It no longer can do that. It no longer can rotate its own men out because, as I say, it's surrounded on 3 sides and is under constant bombardment, either aerial bombing or artillery. The fate of Pokrovsk, Krasnoarmeysk, is precisely the same as that of Chasiv Yar. That was taken by the Russians. It's a nearby city, also was a logistics center. It was taken by the Russians after several months of siege operations, and it fell without loss of many Russian lives. And even the Ukrainians didn't have terrible losses there because they were able to wiggle out of the area. That is what's going to happen in Krasnoarmeysk in the next week or 2. That will leave essentially a clear route to the Dnieper River over the plains of Ukraine. There are a couple of little towns, Kramatorsk and Slavyansk on the way, but they are insignificant compared to the fortifications that Chasiv Yar and this Pokrovsk had from years of preparatory work by the Ukrainians from 2014 to 2024. The result is that on the ground, Russia is prepared to take the whole of Donbass
Yes.
up to the Dnieper River.
Gilbert Doctorow, thank you very, very much for your insight there on that topic. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but we will, of course, bring you all the updates that we get on the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict. For our next story, we move over to the Middle East, where the World Health Organization has urged Israel to allow the stockpiling of medical supplies in Gaza to address a catastrophic health crisis ahead of Israel's planned takeover of Gaza City. With more than half of medicines completely out of stock, only half of hospitals and less than 40% of primary health centres are partially functioning. Hospitals like Al-Shifa and Al-Alai are operating well beyond capacity, with bed occupancy reaching 240 and 300% respectively. The WHO reported 148 deaths from malnutrition this year and nearly 12,000 children under 5 suffering from acute malnutrition in July, including over 2,500 cases of severe malnutrition. Supply delays and restricted aid entry have hindered efforts to stock hospitals adequately, raising concerns as Israel prepares for military action in the region. Here's what Rick Peeperskorn, WHO's representative in the Palestinian territories, had to say.
So we're able to bring in less supplies due to the cumbersome procedures due to some of the products which are still denied, and we're constantly negotiating about that. We want to make sure that hospitals are at least a little stocked up. We currently cannot do that, and we also want to rebuild our own reserves. And we currently are not able to do that in a proper way.
We're now joined by Adrian Calamel. He's a terror scholar and he joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Adrian, for joining us. Adrian, health supplies, humanitarian aid has been central to the public opinion currently on Israel, and also it's a huge crisis in the Gaza Strip. When you hear numbers like nearly 12,000 children under 5 suffering from acute malnutrition in July alone, the WHO reports 148 deaths from malnutrition this year. What is Israel's response, reason for restricting such humanitarian aid that people in Gaza seem to really need right now?
Oh, thank you for having me, Thomas. And I think we need to look at the term Israel restricting the aid and look more about distribution, what's going on inside of Gaza. We have seen over the course of 2 years that once aid arrives in Gaza, that it is immediately hijacked. The UN came out with a report that about 88% of their trucks have been looted on their way to the destination. So it's not a matter of delivering the aid, it's who's delivering the aid. And the problem is when aid gets pushed into Gaza, and this is a problem Israel has to deal with, and the world should be paying attention to this, Hamas will take these aid for themselves, and also we have to remember that medical aid is fungible. They make money on the market by reselling these goods that are coming in. So it's the distribution. Hamas wants to control the distribution so they can maintain control in the Gaza Strip and really weaponize aid, make it a weapon against Israel. Now, Israel and the United States have tried to set up the global humanitarian, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or Fund to make sure that the food is getting to the people that need it, not to the Hamas fighters. And I think this is where the real disconnect is. I mean, that's why we see countries doing airdrops in, because that's unpredictable. They can drop it, people can rush to it, get to the aid. When there's certain areas where Hamas has limited aid to come into, it's a ripe plum. They can pick them up as soon as the aid comes in, and we've seen the warehouses with Hamas trucks, and I've got the videos of them riding on lorries with 4 guys with Kalashnikovs on top of it. So it is, Thomas, one of the things that I think has been the biggest mistake in this whole conflict is not moving the civilian population out of the Gaza Strip. Moving them over to Sinai for a temporary period, putting up nice housing, semi-temporary, but nice housing where people can get the food, can get the medical aid, can get the treatment that they need, okay? So that in the Gaza Strip, that you just have Israel and Hamas fighting each other and not the Palestinian people caught in the crosshairs.
Adrian, people would say that can be seen as a form of ethnic cleansing, and of course land is central to this conflict. Your thoughts on the actions of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? Obviously, it's been reported that over 1,300 have died trying to access aid, and that they continue to do so. We continue getting these reports. Your thoughts, just quickly, on the actions of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and how it operates?
Well, that's part of weaponizing the aid by Hamas. I mean, when we see these reports and we see these the aid from GHF coming in, we see gunfire, we see people running, but we don't see any IDF soldiers. We don't see any Israelis there.
Adrian, I'm really sorry. We have ran out of time on that segment. You are staying with us, though, to discuss a related development where Denmark will send a C-130 Hercules military plane to airdrop 2 shipments of emergency aid to Gaza before August the 22nd. Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen announced this operation takes advantage of temporary airspace access granted by Israel, allowing limited aid delivery. Rasmussen cautioned that airdrops are a last resort and not a substitute for full humanitarian access, noting that previous airdrops have been minimal compared to the daily truck loads required to meet Gaza's needs. The details of the aid contents remain unspecified, and the success of the mission depends on certain conditions being met. This move comes amid rising international concern over hunger in Gaza, where the UN reported dozens of children have died from malnutrition since July. Adrian, I wanted to next get on to the international pressure that's been building on Israel, of course, because of the humanitarian situation that's going on there. What are the advantages and also, of course, some of the disadvantages of these air drops, and your analysis on the international pressure that has been building around Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip?
Well, great questions, Thomas. The international pressure, we saw this international pressure before October 7th, where Gaza was referred to as an open-air prison, that there is claims about, all sorts of claims about human rights abuses and this stuff. So it's been out there in the ether. It just needed a cataclysmic event, which was October 7th. About a month later, Israel starts their operations, and then it's the longer any type of campaign goes on, a military campaign, as we've seen, public opinion is going to turn against it. And that's what Israel has been dealing with since the beginning of the war. And they should have really recognized this early on, that this needs to come to some type of quick conclusion, because the longer it drags on, you're going to have the entire world turning against you. So that was, that's been one of the main issues. It's been kind of what you call mission creep in military terms, and not being able to finish the job, which is eliminate Hamas and get the hostages back. And then with the airdrops, I understand that. I understand why they have to do it. It's because, as I said before, aid has been weaponized. There's a dispute about who can deliver it. And we see these same disputes in Afghanistan. The United States is sending millions, billions of dollars to the Taliban, expecting them to distribute it in a fair and equitable manner. This is the same type of situation that we're dealing with in the Gaza Strip, is that when the aid comes in, it doesn't go to the people in need. And we in the West need to get our head around the way Hamas operates, and that, the civilians in many cases, work to their advantage when they, are in misery, and they toil in misery, Hamas. We have to look at their history, and they did. I mean, looking back to what they did when the takeover of Gaza Strip, they ran the Palestinian Authority out of there. It was a civil war. So they're a maximalist group which wants nothing but control and takes orders directly from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yes. Adrian, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insight here on the program. We have some breaking news here. The European Union, the UK and Japan have urged action against famine in Gaza. The European Union, Britain and Japan have issued a statement saying the humanitarian suffering in Gaza has reached unimaginable levels. Famine is unfolding before our eyes. These are words in a joint statement signed by the European Union's top diplomat and foreign ministers from 24 countries, including Canada and Australia. And here on NewsX, well, we will continue to bring you all updates coming out of that conflict as we get them. We now move over to the United States and their foreign policy, where America and China have clashed at the United Nations over the Panama Canal, with Washington warning that Beijing's influence over the key waterway could threaten global trade and security, and Beijing accusing the US of using such claims as a pretext to take control of the canal. The exchange took place at a Security Council meeting chaired by Panama's President Jose Raul Molino, who reaffirmed his country's ownership of the canal and its permanent neutrality. The meeting focused on maritime security challenges, including piracy, transactional crime, and cyber attacks on ports. Acting US Ambassador Dorothy Shea raised concerns over what she called China's outsized influence in the canal zone, warning it poses a risk to global commerce. She also criticized Beijing's maritime claims and actions in the South China Sea. China's UN envoy Fu Kong responded by praising Panama's management of the canal, stressing China's respect for its neutrality and accusing the United States of fabricating lies as a cover to gain control. Fu also condemned what he called US economic coercion and military presence in the region. President Molino closed the session by repeating Panama's commitment to sovereign control of the canal, calling neutrality its strongest defense against any threat. Let's listen in to what China and the US had to say at the UNSC meeting.
美方炮制谎言，无端攻击中国，无非是为其控制运河制造借口。中方坚决反对经济胁迫和霸凌行径，敦促美方停止造谣生事。美国是迫害南海和平稳定的最大搅局者。美方在南海地区部署包括陆基中程导弹在内的进攻性武器，频繁派遣大规模舰机到南海搞军事侦察和演习，在别国的家门口耀武扬威、横冲直撞，无非是想把南海搅乱，服务美国的地缘战略。
The United States, however, remains concerned about China's outsized influence over the Panama Canal area, especially over critical infrastructure and port operations. China's expansive and unlawful maritime claims and aggressive actions demonstrate its threat to maritime security and commerce. The United States rejects such claims and stands with claimants in the face of China's provocative actions and intimidation.
We're now joined by William Yang, who's a China analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan to discuss this further. William, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. The acting US ambassador, Dorothy Shea, has raised concerns over what she has called outsized influence by China in the Panama Canal. Obviously, US President Donald Trump has said that he wishes to take over the Panama Canal once again. How do you analyze this situation and the stances of the two ambassadors that we just heard there?
So I think the situation in the Panama Canal is basically a reflection of the US-China great power competition around the world. And in recent years, it has increasingly focused more on key international infrastructure projects and also key waterways or key passageways that both sides view as important to take control in order to actually be able to have influence over maximizing their own maritime transport interests. And we know that the US has increasingly been very vocal about Chinese influence in key infrastructure projects around the world. And they have in recent years tried to work with like-minded partners to try to squeeze out China around the world. And we have also seen other like-minded countries like the European Union proposing similar infrastructure projects like the Global Gateway to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative. But at the same time, maritime transport and maritime control over maritime security remains a very important part of China's global ambition and global strategy, because we know that the Chinese see these as an important way for them to export their commodities to all corners around the world, and at the same time using these infrastructure projects to connect, basically build up China's influence network. And this is basically being spearheaded by the flagship Belt and Road Initiative. Even though over the years there have been controversies about the impact of these projects on local host countries, but continuously, I think China's ability to outbid other countries with the funding that they can provide and the loans that they can provide allow China to continue to be in a very powerful position in the leading, in the race of competing for global infrastructure competition.
William Yang, thank you very much for your analysis on that situation. Pleasure to have you on the programme. For our next update, we move over to Europe, where a wildfire in Turkey's northwestern Çanakkale province is now largely under control after forcing the evacuation of over 2,000 people. Helicopters and planes continue dropping water on areas where smoke is still rising. Residents returning today found burnt facades, broken windows and collapsed roofs. Some homes remain structurally sound but suffered heavy damage inside. A local firefighter said the blaze spread rapidly due to strong winds and scorching temperatures. Let's listen in to him.
kadar yangına müdahale ettik. Şu anda da aracımız bozuldu. Yani aracımızın ustasının gelmesini bekliyoruz. Yorgunuz. Allah bir daha böyle bir Çanakkale böyle bir şey yaşatmasın.
This fire began on Monday, tearing through forests near the city. Reports say that Turkey has recorded its hottest July in 55 years and faced hundreds of wildfires this summer alone, which were driven by extreme heat, dry air and strong winds. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.